You replay the conversation in your head for the fourth time today. What you should have said, what you wish you hadn't said, the comment that landed wrong, the meeting where someone talked over you, the message you sent too fast and regretted the second it delivered. You feel outmatched. Not because the other person is smarter or stronger or more capable, but because they seem to know something you don't. Some rule about when to speak and when to stay silent, when to push and when to wait, that you're always one step behind on. You react. They stay composed. You explain yourself. They say nothing and somehow come out ahead. You leave every confrontation feeling like you gave something away, even when you won. Maybe it's a coworker who undermines you in meetings, a partner who knows exactly which words will make you defend yourself, a family member who can pull you into an argument with a single sentence. Or maybe it's not even another person. Maybe it's just you, at war with your own impulses, losing ground to your own temper, your own fear, your own need to be right. Here's the reframe. This isn't a personality flaw. It isn't a sign that you're weak or too sensitive or bad at conflict. It's a strategy problem. And strategy problems have solutions. 25 centuries ago, a general named Sun Tzu wrote a text that has outlived every empire it was written for. He wasn't obsessed with battles. He was obsessed with avoiding them. His central claim, radical even now, was that the greatest commanders won before the fighting ever started. Through preparation. Through reading the situation correctly. Through mastering their own minds so completely that the enemy's provocations had nothing to grab onto. He wrote something that has survived intact for 2,500 years. All warfare is based on deception. Not deception of others, in the way we'll use it here. Deception in the sense that what you reveal of yourself should never be everything you have. In this video, we're translating Sun Tzu's strategy into something you can actually use, not on a battlefield, but in your career, your relationships, and the war that happens entirely inside your own head. You'll learn 7 strategic laws. How to stop bleeding energy into fights that were never worth having. How to read your real circumstances instead of the story your anxiety tells you. How to hold your composure at the exact moment it matters most. The 6th law is the one most people never learn, and it's the difference between reacting to your life and commanding it. Stay to the end, because that's where everything else in this video gets tested. Law 1. The war before the war, every external conflict you've ever lost, you lost first on the inside. Think about the last time someone got under your skin, the moment they said the thing, and something in you turned hot and reactive before your mind had even caught up. That heat wasn't caused by them. It was already loaded in you, waiting for a trigger. They just found it. Sun Tzu's most famous teaching isn't really about enemies. It's about self-knowledge. He taught that a commander who understands his own strengths, his own weaknesses, his own patterns of fear and pride, can face almost anything, because nothing catches him by surprise from the inside. The commander who doesn't know himself is defeated the moment conflict starts, regardless of what the enemy does, because his own undisciplined reactions become the enemy's best weapon. This is the war before the war. Before you ever deal with a difficult boss, a manipulative friend, a partner who knows how to needle you, you have a prior, more important war to win, knowing exactly what sets you off and why. Most people skip this step entirely. They walk into every conflict as a stranger to themselves, discovering their own trigger points in real time, in front of the person who benefits most from their loss of control. It's a bit like a general marching into unfamiliar territory with no scouts sent ahead, no map, no sense of where the weak ground lies, and then acting surprised when the ground gives way beneath him at the worst possible moment. The uncomfortable truth is that other people often know your weak points faster than you do, simply because they're watching you from the outside, unclouded by the story you tell yourself about who you are. A sibling who's known you since childhood can name your exact pressure points in seconds. A skilled manipulator can find them almost as quickly, purely through trial and error, testing a few remarks and watching which ones land. If you haven't done this mapping work yourself, you're always playing catch-up, always finding out where your walls are thin by watching them get breached. Consider a composite case. We'll call him Daniel. Daniel worked under a manager who had a habit of making small, cutting comments in team meetings, nothing overt enough to report, just enough to needle. For months, Daniel's stomach would drop every time it happened, and he'd either go silent and stew for days, or snap back with something sharp that made him look reactive in front of everyone. Neither response changed anything. If anything, both fed the pattern. The silence read as weakness, the snapping back read as instability, and the manager, whether he meant to or not, kept finding the same door unlocked. Daniel didn't have a management problem, he had a self-knowledge problem. He had never sat down and asked, why does this specific kind of comment land so hard on me? Other people in the same meetings seemed to shrug the comments off entirely. So the variable wasn't the comment, the variable was Daniel. When he finally sat with the question honestly, he found an old story underneath it, a childhood pattern of being dismissed at the dinner table, talked over, treated as an afterthought, and a deep, unexamined fear of being seen as unimportant that had been running quietly in the background of his adult life ever since. The manager hadn't invented that wound. He'd just been the first person in years to press directly on it, probably without even knowing the wound was there. Once Daniel saw the pattern clearly, the comments lost most of their power. Not because the manager changed, the manager never changed at all. Because Daniel was no longer discovering his own weak point in real time, live, in front of an audience. He already knew where it was. He could feel a comment approaching that terrain, and instead of falling into the old reflex, simply notice it. There it is, that's the old wound. This isn't actually about my worth as a professional. It's an old signal firing on a new trigger. That single act of recognition, repeated enough times, began to drain the reflex of its automatic power. This is where modern psychology quietly agrees with a 2,000-year-old general. Research on emotional regulation consistently shows that people who can name and anticipate their emotional triggers in advance recover from provocation faster and make better decisions under stress than people who are ambushed by their own feelings in the moment. The anticipation itself does much of the work. It converts an ambush into something merely expected, and expected things are far easier to hold steady against. Self-knowledge isn't a soft, feel-good idea. It's tactical. It's the terrain map for every conflict you'll ever have. And without it, you're navigating blind, discovering the cliffs by falling off them. Here is the practice. Before you try to outmaneuver anyone else, take an honest inventory of your own patterns. What words make your chest tighten before your mind has even passed them? What kind of person makes you want to prove yourself? And why that particular kind? What situations make you speak too fast, agree too quickly to things you'll resent later, or go silent exactly when something needed to be said? Write these down if it helps. Most people can name 3 or 4 of these patterns within minutes. Once they actually stop to look, the patterns were never hidden. They were simply never examined. You cannot outthink an opponent, internal or external, while you are still a mystery to yourself. Sun Tzu built an entire philosophy of war on this one premise. Everything else in this video is built on top of it. Law 2. The price of every reaction, not every provocation, deserves a response. This sounds obvious. It almost never feels obvious in the moment. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from a day spent reacting to a comment, a slight, a passive-aggressive message, a slow reply, a look someone gave you. By the evening, you're depleted, and you can't always say exactly why. You didn't do anything hard. You just spent the entire day defending territory that didn't need defending. Sun Tzu treated a soldier's energy as a finite resource to be spent with extreme discipline. Armies that engaged every skirmish, chased every retreat, answered every provocation, wore themselves down long before the real battle arrived, and arrived at it too depleted to win. The strongest position, he taught, often belongs to the side that simply refused to spend itself on what didn't matter. Translate that inward. Every time you respond to something that was designed to bait you, a snide comment, a manipulative jab, an insult dressed as a joke, you are spending a resource you cannot get back that day. Your composure, your clarity, your emotional reserves. And the people or situations that provoke you the most are very often the ones least deserving of that expenditure. This is where decision fatigue research lines up with ancient strategy. The mind has a limited capacity for self-control in a given day. Every act of restraint, every emotional battle, fought and won, draws down a shared reserve. Spend it on things that don't matter, and you'll have nothing left when something that actually matters shows up. This is why the same person who handles a genuine crisis with total composure can fall apart over a slow reply to a text message an hour later. It isn't a contradiction, it's a depleted reserve, spent earlier in the day on things that never deserved it. So the question is, never do I have a right to respond? Of course you do. Almost every provocation earns you that right. The better question, the strategic question is this worth what it will cost me? Not morally worth it, tactically worth it. What do you get back for the composure you're about to spend? Most provocations are not requests for a response. They're bait, whether the other person is conscious of it or not. Somebody making a cutting remark in a meeting doesn't need you to defend yourself on the spot. They need, more than anything, a reaction. Because a reaction confirms they still have power over your state. It tells them the lever works. Deny them the reaction, and the bait sits there, untaken, and loses its charge over time. The way any tactic loses its charge when it stops producing results. This isn't the same as suppression. Suppression is swallowing your anger and letting it curdle into resentment that leaks out sideways, later at the wrong target. What we're describing is selection, consciously choosing which fights are worth your energy and letting the rest pass through you without landing, the way water moves around a rock instead of breaking against it. It helps to notice how many of these small spends happen in a single ordinary day once you actually start counting. The slow driver you tailgate out of irritation, the comment section you can't resist correcting, the group chat message you reread 6 times, building a case in your head for how to respond to a tone that might not even have been intended. None of these individually feels significant. Together, across a week, they add up to a person who has almost nothing left for the moments that genuinely deserve their full presence, their child, their partner, the decision at work that will actually shape the next year of their career. There's a particular trap worth naming here. The belief that not responding means losing. Plenty of people carry an internal rule that says silence equals defeat, that every jab requires a comeback or the jab wins by default. This rule is almost always inherited from somewhere. A household where the loudest voice controlled the room. A school where backing down meant humiliation, and it rarely holds up under scrutiny. Silence isn't loss. Silence is simply the refusal to enter a negotiation you never agreed to. Try this filter before you respond to anything that stings. Will this matter in a week? Does responding move anything meaningfully forward, or does it just discharge my own irritation? Is there a version of me an hour from now, calmer, who would still choose to say this? If that calmer version of you wouldn't bother, that's information. That's your strategic self, momentarily quieter than your reactive self, telling you exactly where the line is. If the answer is no, you're not weak for staying quiet. You're conserving the only resource that actually determines how well you handle the parts of your life that do matter. The conversation with your partner that actually needs your full presence. The the decision at work that actually needs your clearest thinking, the version of you that shows up for the people who matter, instead of the depleted, snappish version left over after a day of unnecessary battles. Law 3. Reading the ground as it is before any campaign. Sun Tzu insisted on one non-negotiable step. Know the terrain. Not the terrain you expect, not the terrain you fear, not the terrain from the last battle, the actual ground you are standing on right now. Most people lose their footing long before any real conflict begins, because they never did this. They walk into a hard conversation already convinced of how it will go, based on an old pattern, an old relationship, an old version of themselves. They're not responding to the situation in front of them. They're responding to a story about the situation, assembled out of fear and memory. This is one of the most expensive mistakes a person can make. Fighting the terrain you imagine, instead of the terrain that's actually there, means every move you make is slightly wrong, a countermeasure for a threat that isn't real, or a defense against a person who has already changed. Ask yourself, honestly, the next time you feel your guard going up, am I responding to what is happening, or to what usually happens? Is this person actually attacking me, or am I bracing for an old wound that hasn't opened yet? These two questions, asked consistently, will save you from more unnecessary conflict than almost any other single habit. Reading the ground clearly also means being honest about your actual position, not the position you wish you had, and not the worst-case one your anxiety is narrating. If you're underprepared for a negotiation, admit it, instead of performing confidence you don't have. Because performed confidence collapses the moment it's tested, and costs you more credibility than honesty would have. If you're in a stronger position than you feel, recognize that too, instead of shrinking out of habit, because unnecessary shrinking hands away leverage you actually hold. Sun Tzu's commanders lost far more often to their own distorted maps than to a genuinely superior enemy. An army that believes itself surrounded will fight like a surrounded army, even when the surrounding force is smaller and weaker than it imagines. This distortion runs in both directions, and it's worth naming both. Some people read every situation as more dangerous than it is. Every silence from a friend becomes evidence of betrayal. Every slow reply becomes proof of anger. Every piece of feedback becomes an attack on their worth. Others read every situation as safer than it is, walking into clearly hostile dynamics with a naive confidence that leaves them repeatedly blindsided. Neither is reading the terrain. Both are reading a story. The correction isn't complicated, even though it takes practice. Before you respond to a situation, separate what you actually observed from what you inferred. She didn't reply to my message for 6 hours is an observation. She's angry with me, and pulling away is a story built on top of it. Possibly true, possibly not, but not yet confirmed by anything you actually know. Sun Tzu's scouts didn't report their fears back to the general. They reported what they saw. You can learn to do the same with your own mind, separating the dispatch from the panic riding along with it. Consider a composite case. A man we'll call Theo, newly promoted into a role where he now reported directly to a regional director he barely knew. In their first few one-on-one meetings, the director asked pointed, rapid-fire questions, took few notes, and ended calls abruptly. Theo built an entire narrative on top of these observations within a week. The director thought he was underqualified, was building a case to replace him, was quietly hostile. He started over-preparing to an exhausting degree, over-explaining every decision, arriving to calls defensive before a single word had been exchanged. Months later, in an unrelated conversation, he learnt the director simply ran every one-on-one this way, with everyone, as a matter of personal style, and privately considered Theo one of the stronger performers on the team. Theo hadn't been reading his director, he'd been reading his own anxiety and mistaking the reading for reconnaissance. The terrain had never actually been hostile, only the map in his head had been. This clarity is uncomfortable because it strips away the comforting narratives, the ones where you're always the victim, or always the one under threat, or always destined to be overlooked, or just as often, the ones where you're always right and everyone else is the problem. Clear terrain reading asks something harder of you than either comfortable story, to see your situation as it is, stripped of the story, so you can actually navigate it instead of refighting an old war on new ground, against an opponent who may not even be standing there. Law 4. The enemy inside the gate. Every strategist eventually discovers the same uncomfortable truth. The most dangerous opponent you will ever face is not across the table from you. It's the one operating your own nervous system. Ego, impulsiveness, the need to be right in the moment, regardless of the cost later. These are the forces that make you send the message you'll regret, interrupt the person you needed to listen to, escalate the argument you could have let dissolve on its own. No external opponent has ever defeated you as efficiently as your own undisciplined reactions have. Sun Tzu warned repeatedly against commanders who let anger dictate strategy. The general who attacks out of fury, he wrote, hands the advantage to the enemy before a single blow lands, because rage narrows the mind exactly when it needs to be widest. The angry general fights the battle the enemy wants. The composed general fights the battle that actually needs to be fought. This is the enemy inside the gate, not the person provoking you, but the part of you eager to take the bait. Every time you feel the pull toward an impulsive response, the perfect cutting remark, the immediate defense, the urge to have the last word, that pull is not strategy. It's the ego, mistaking a short-term release for a long-term win. Cognitive reappraisal research offers a useful mirror here. People who pause, even briefly, to reinterpret a provocation, to ask what else this could mean, or whether it's worth the response it's demanding, consistently make calmer, more effective decisions than people who act on the first wave of feeling. The pause itself is the discipline, not suppression. Just enough space for the ego's urgent voice to lose its monopoly on the decision. There's a practical way to catch this voice in the act, before it takes over entirely. The ego's suggestions tend to share a distinct flavor. They're fast, they're absolute, and they're almost always framed around being seen a certain way, rather than around solving anything. I need to make sure they know I'm not stupid. I can't let that comment just sit there. If I don't say something now, everyone will think I agreed. Notice the shared thread. Every one of these is about managing an image, not resolving a situation. The strategic voice, by contrast, tends to be slower to arrive, less dramatic, and oriented toward outcomes rather than optics. What actually needs to happen here? And does saying something right now help that, or hurt it? Learning to tell these two voices apart, in real time, is most of the work of this entire law. Consider Mara, a composite case, a small business owner who had a habit of firing off long, defensive emails the moment a client questioned her work. Every email made things worse. It wasn't that her points were wrong. Often she was technically correct about the details. It was that the emails arrived soaked in the urgency of a wounded ego, and clients could feel it in every line, even when the words themselves were polite. She was fighting to be right in the moment, and losing the relationship in the long run, one perfectly reasonable, terribly timed email at a time. The shift wasn't in what she said. It was in when she said it. She built one rule: no response to anything that stung until at least an hour had passed. Not to cool off performatively, and not to punish the client with silence, but to let the ego's version of the situation fade enough that the strategic version could actually be seen. She kept a private note where she'd draft the angry version first, in full, and never send it. Just writing it out seemed to drain most of its urgency. Then, an hour or a day later, she'd write the version meant to actually be read. The emails she sent later were shorter, calmer, and addressed the client's actual concern instead of her own bruised pride. Within a year, they won her measurably more renewed contracts than the fast, defensive ones ever had. Not because she'd become a pushover, but because her responses had stopped being. Secretly. about her own ego's need to win the exchange. The enemy inside the gate never fully disappears. Sun Tzu didn't promise his commanders they'd stop feeling anger, fear, or the urge for glory. He simply insisted that a good commander could feel these things without letting them issue the orders. That distinction is everything. The feeling arrives regardless. What changes, with practice, is who's holding the pen when the response gets written. Identify the ego's voice, name it as separate from your strategic judgment, and you can let it speak without letting it decide. That alone changes almost everything about how conflict unfolds around you. Law 5. The mask of stillness. Sun Tzu's teaching on deception is the most misread part of his philosophy. People assume it means manipulation, tricking your enemy, lying about your intentions. Turned inward, it means something else entirely, not handing over your full emotional hand to whoever happens to be standing in front of you. There is a specific kind of vulnerability in reacting instantly and visibly to everything. It tells everyone around you exactly which levers move you, and how far, and how fast. People who want to provoke you learn your reaction time the way a locksmith learns a lock. Every visible flinch is information they can use again. Stillness is not coldness, and it's not dishonesty. It's the discipline of not performing your internal state for an audience that hasn't earned it. When you feel the urge to visibly react, to let your face, your voice, your immediate words broadcast exactly how much something has landed, that urge is worth questioning. Who benefits from seeing that? What do you gain by showing it right now, in this moment, to this person? This is different from bottling things up. The feeling is real, and it deserves somewhere to go. A trusted friend, a journal, a private moment later where you can process it fully. What stillness withholds is not the feeling itself, but its immediate, unfiltered broadcast to the person who triggered it. There's a difference between processing an emotion and performing it live for whoever caused it. The strategic value here is significant. A person who reveals nothing in the moment is far harder to provoke, because provocation depends on visible feedback. Take away the visible flinch, and most manipulative tactics lose their reward entirely. People stop pulling a lever that produces no observable result. There's a second, quieter benefit. Stillness buys you time. The moment you feel your composure slipping, a masked, steady exterior gives you room to actually think, instead of reacting from the rawest, least strategic version of yourself. You're not hiding from the situation. You're refusing to hand it your least considered response. Think about the specific mechanics of this. A raised voice usually gets met with a raised voice. Because the visible escalation is contagious, it gives the other person permission, even an obligation, to match your intensity. A steady, unraised voice, held even when the pressure to escalate is high, does the opposite. It denies the exchange its fuel. Most arguments require two participants matching each other's temperature to sustain themselves. Refuse to match, and the argument, deprived of its fuel, has nowhere left to go. This also changes how people negotiate with you in the broadest sense of that word, not just formal negotiations, but every daily exchange where two people are quietly testing where the other's limits are. Someone who reveals their full reaction instantly is easy to read, and therefore easy to manage. Someone who holds their reaction back without ever being dishonest about their actual position when it matters becomes far harder to predict, and unpredictability, used with integrity, is a genuine form of strength. It means people have to actually ask you what you think, instead of assuming they can read it off your face in real time. None of this requires performance. You're not pretending to be unaffected while secretly seething. That's its own form of dishonesty, and it tends to leak out eventually, in tone if not in words. What's being asked of you is more precise. Separate the moment of feeling something from the moment of showing it, and use that separation deliberately, choosing when and to whom you reveal your full state, rather than broadcasting it automatically to whoever happens to be in the room. This law asks something specific of you, Practice not needing to show your hand, not out of coldness, but out of respect for your own clarity and out of respect for the fact that your unfiltered first reaction is rarely your best considered one. Let people earn your visible reactions through trust, through time, through actually deserving that level of access to your interior. Most provocations don't deserve them. Most people, if you're honest, haven't earned them either. Law 6, the moment of contact. This is the chapter that decides everything. Every strategic principle you've learned so far, self-knowledge, energy conservation, clear terrain reading, discipline over ego, the mask of stillness, exists to prepare you for one moment, the moment of direct contact. The confrontation you cannot avoid, the provocation so sharp, so personal, so perfectly aimed at your oldest wound that every instinct in your body screams at you to react immediately and without restraint. This is where most people, even ones who've made real progress, lose everything they've built. Because the highest stakes moment is exactly when discipline feels hardest to access. Your heart rate spikes, your thinking narrows. The urge to defend yourself, to strike back, to prove them wrong in front of everyone, becomes almost physical in its intensity. Sun Tzu understood this moment intimately. He taught that the decisive point of any campaign is not the largest battle. It's the single moment where a commander's composure is tested most severely, and where the outcome of everything that came before is either honored or thrown away in an instant of impulse. A campaign of perfect discipline can be undone in one moment of unchecked reaction. This is why he considered self-command, not troop strength, the deciding factor in almost every conflict that mattered. Picture the moment. Someone says the thing that hits hardest, publicly, unfairly, precisely targeted, whether by design or by accident, at the exact insecurity you've spent months learning to manage. Every version of you that came before this moment, every reactive, unguarded version, every earlier draft of yourself, wants to answer immediately, wants to match their intensity, wants to win the room in the next 10 seconds. Your body is already ahead of your mind. Your pulse has spiked. Your face is hot. Some old, fast, animal part of you has already decided this is a threat and is reaching for whatever weapon is nearest, which, in most modern confrontations, is simply your own worst words. This is the test. Not whether you feel the provocation. You will. You will feel it exactly as sharply as the old, undisciplined version of you would have. Sun Tzu never asked his commanders to feel nothing. That was never the standard, and it was never realistic. Fear, anger, humiliation, the desire to strike back, these are not signs of failure. They are simply what a nervous system does under a direct hit. He asked his commanders to act from clarity rather than heat, even while the heat was fully present, roaring, demanding to be obeyed. The discipline isn't the absence of the reaction, it's the refusal to let the reaction drive the decision. Those are two entirely different things. And confusing them is where almost everyone loses this moment. In this moment, everything you've built comes down to a single choice, made in seconds, sometimes less than seconds. Do you spend your composure, the resource you've been so carefully conserving through every smaller provocation, on this one, biggest provocation? Or do you hold it, knowing, with everything you've practiced, that holding it is the single most strategically powerful thing available to you right now? Here is what holding it actually looks like, in practice, not in theory, because theory is useless at the exact moment this matters. A breath, taken deliberately, before a single word leaves you, not a dramatic pause for effect, just enough space for the fastest, hottest layer of the reaction to pass through without seizing the controls. A recognition, silent and entirely internal, that no one else needs to see. This is the moment. This is the test. This is exactly where the version of me who reacts loses, and the version of me who waits wins. Not a performance of calm for the room to witness and admire, a genuine internal decision. Made under real pressure, to withhold your least considered response and choose your most strategic one instead, even though the least considered one is right there, loaded, and would feel enormously satisfying to fire. This is not passivity, and the distinction matters enormously. Passivity is doing nothing because you're afraid of the consequences of doing something. This is active restraint, a conscious, effortful choice not to spend your composure on a provocation that was, whether deliberately or not, designed to extract exactly that spending. It requires more strength than lashing out ever does, not less. Lashing out is the path of least resistance. The nervous system is built for it, primed for it, rewards it with an immediate hit of righteous relief. Holding is the harder path, every single time, which is exactly why it works. Anyone can react. It takes a trained mind, tested under real conditions, to hold at the exact moment holding is hardest. And sometimes, even with all this discipline, you will fail this moment. You'll say the sharp thing, you'll match the heat you meant to rise above. This doesn't undo the work. A single lost moment of contact is not a lost war. It's data, a reminder of exactly where your remaining edges are, to be studied afterward with the same clear-eyed honesty from Law 1, rather than buried in shame. The strategist who has one bad moment and studies it closely ends up stronger than the strategist who never gets tested at all. What happens when you do hold changes everything about how people treat you going forward. The person who provoked you, expecting a reaction and receiving composed silence or a measured, unhurried response instead, loses their read on you entirely. They no longer know which levers move you, and a lever that no longer produces a visible result is a lever most people eventually stop pulling. The room, if there is one, notices who stayed steady under real, undeniable pressure, and that quiet steadiness registers, whether or not anyone says a word about it, as a kind of authority no sharp comeback could ever have purchased. This is the law most people never learn, because it cannot be learned in comfortable moments, no matter how much theory you absorb about it beforehand. It is only learned in the moment of contact itself, under real pressure, when the cost of failing is immediate, personal, and witnessed. Every other law in this video is preparation for this one single moment, repeated across a lifetime in different disguises. This is where the war is actually won or lost, not in the planning, not in the aftermath, but in the handful of seconds where the provocation lands and the choice, entirely yours, gets made. Law 7. Water finds the way. Sun Tzu compared the ideal strategist to water. Water has no fixed shape. It moves around obstacles instead of shattering against them. It finds the lowest, most efficient path, and it adapts instantly to whatever container or terrain it meets, without losing its essential nature. Pour it into a narrow channel, and it becomes narrow. Pour it into an open basin, and it spreads wide. Neither shape is a compromise of what water fundamentally is. Both are simply water, responding intelligently to what it's actually met with. Compare this to the strategist's opposite, the person who has one script for every situation, one tone for every relationship, one approach regardless of who's across from them or what the moment actually calls for. This rigidity often gets mistaken for strength. A fixed, unbending posture can look, from a distance, like conviction. But a tree that refuses to bend in a storm is the one that snaps. A reed that bends with the wind is still standing the next morning. The strategist who insists on meeting every kind of terrain the same way eventually meets a terrain that breaks them. This is the final discipline, and it's the one that makes everything before it sustainable. Rigid plans break under pressure, because reality rarely cooperates with the version of events you scripted in advance. The person who insists on executing yesterday's plan today, regardless of what's actually happening in front of them, is fighting the terrain instead of reading it. The mistake we named back in Law 3, now returning at a higher cost. Formlessness doesn't mean having no direction. It means holding your direction loosely enough to adjust the method without abandoning the goal. You know where you're headed, toward composure, toward strategic clarity, toward a life where you're not constantly bled dry by conflicts that didn't deserve your energy, but you stay flexible about exactly how you get there. Because the terrain will keep shifting, and a strategist who can't adapt is eventually broken by the first situation that doesn't match the plan. This shows up in small, unglamorous ways, more often than dramatic ones. The approach that worked with one difficult coworker will not work with the next difficult coworker, because the underlying wound they're operating from is different. And a rigid strategist keeps applying yesterday's solution to today's different problem, wondering why it stopped working. The boundary that needed to be firm and immediate in one relationship might need to be gradual and patient in another. Water doesn't ask the riverbed to change shape for its convenience. It studies the shape it's actually met with and moves accordingly without ever losing its underlying nature in the process. This also means releasing the idea that discipline looks the same in every situation. Sometimes the strategic move is the held silence from the last chapter. Sometimes it's a direct, calm statement of exactly where you stand, delivered without any heat at all, which can be far more disarming than silence. Sometimes the strategic move is walking away from a conversation entirely, and sometimes it's staying in an uncomfortable one longer than feels natural, because leaving early would hand away more than staying costs. There is no single correct posture. There is only the posture that fits the actual terrain in front of you, chosen with a clear mind instead of a reflexive one. This is where all six really, converging here in the seventh, previous laws collapse into a single practice, no longer separate ideas, but one integrated instinct. You know yourself, so you're not ambushed by your own reactions. You conserve your energy, so you have reserves left when they actually matter. You read the actual terrain, not the story about it. You've named the enemy inside the gate and learned to let it speak without letting it decide. You've practiced stillness instead of broadcasting every internal shift to whoever happens to be watching. And you've been tested, at least once, in the moment of contact itself, the sharpest test any of this offers, and held, or failed, and studied the failure, which is its own kind of holding. Water doesn't win by force. It wins by persistence, by adaptability, by a total absence of unnecessary resistance to things that were never worth resisting in the first place. Given enough time, water reshapes stone, not by attacking it, but by simply continuing to move, patiently, along the path of least unnecessary conflict, for as long as it takes. That is the shape of the strategist you're becoming. Not harder, not colder, not more guarded in a way that isolates you from other people, but more fluid, more precise, less willing to waste strength on battles that were never worth having, and more able, as a direct result, to show up fully for the ones that are. Resolution and integration something shifts in a person who has genuinely internalized these laws, and it isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. No one hands you a certificate for it. Most of the people around you won't be able to say exactly what's different about you, only that something is. That you've become harder to rattle, harder to read in the old, easy way. Steadier in rooms that used to overwhelm you. It isn't a sudden ability to win every argument, or silence every critic, or come out on top of every confrontation. That was never the goal, and chasing that goal would have missed the entire point of everything Sun Tzu taught. The goal was quieter and, in the end, far more valuable. Command of your own internal state, regardless of what's happening around you, regardless of who's trying to provoke you, regardless of how unfair or sudden or precisely targeted the provocation happens to be. Picture the difference, concretely, between who you were at the start of this and who you're becoming now. Before, a single provocation could derail your entire day. A comment at 9 in the morning still echoing in your chest at 9 that night, replayed on a loop, refought a dozen times in the shower, in the car, in bed, unresolved and unresolvable, because the argument was happening entirely inside your own head, against an opponent who'd forgotten about it hours ago. Now, the same comment lands, is recognized for exactly what it is, a provocation. Possibly deliberate, possibly not, deserving of a measured response or none at all, and is allowed to pass through without commandeering your whole nervous system for the rest of the day. That is not numbness. Numbness would mean not feeling it. This is mastery, feeling it fully, and still choosing deliberately what happens next. Before, you walked into hard conversations already defeated by your own anticipation, fighting an imagined version of events instead of the real one actually in front of you, exhausted before the conversation even started because you'd already fought it 3 times in your head on the way there. Now, you arrive with a clear read on the actual terrain, prepared for what's really there instead of what you feared might be there, which means you have real energy left for the conversation that's actually happening instead of the rehearsal. Before, every visible flinch handed information to people who used it against you, whether they meant to or not. Your face was a live broadcast of exactly which levers moved you and how far and how fast. Now, your composure has become genuinely unreadable to anyone who hasn't earned the right to your unguarded reactions. Not because you're hiding, not because you've gone cold, but because you've simply stopped performing your internal state for an audience that never deserved that level of access in the first place. And in the moment that matters most, the moment of contact, the provocation aimed precisely at your oldest wound, delivered publicly, unfairly, exactly when you were least prepared for it, you have, at least once, held, you know now, not theoretically, not as something you read about, but from lived experience, in your own body, under real pressure, that you are capable of choosing your most strategic response over your least considered one, even when every instinct was screaming for the opposite. That knowledge doesn't leave once it's earned. It becomes part of how you carry yourself into every future conflict, a kind of proof you can return to whenever doubt creeps back in. This is what winning without fighting actually looks like. Not the absence of conflict. Conflict finds everyone eventually, no matter how skilled they become, and anyone who promises you a conflict-free life is selling something false. Not the absence of feeling. You will still feel every provocation as sharply as you ever did. The nervous system doesn't get gentler with practice, it gets better supervised. What changes is what happens between the feeling and the response. That gap, once non-existent, collapsed instantly into whatever your first impulse demanded, is now where all your real power lives. Everything Sun Tzu taught, translated all the way down, is really just an instruction for widening that single gap. People notice this shift before they can name it, and they respond to it whether or not they understand why. The coworker who used to get a rise out of you stops trying, eventually, because the lever no longer produces a result, and there's no strategic reason to keep pulling a lever that does nothing. The relationship that used to run on your reactivity finds a new, calmer equilibrium, because you're no longer supplying the fuel that kept the old pattern burning. Rooms that used to overwhelm you no longer do, because you've stopped fighting terrain that was never the real battlefield to begin with. The real battlefield, the whole time, was always the 6 inches between your ears. None of this required you to become someone else. It required you to become fully, strategically yourself, self-known instead of a mystery to your own reactions. Energy conserved instead of bled dry by battles that never deserved you. Clear-eyed instead of lost in stories about what's happening. Undivided by your own ego instead of governed by it. Composed under real pressure instead of hostage to your first impulse. And adaptable enough to meet whatever terrain comes next without shattering against it. This is the quiet strength Sun Tzu was actually describing 25 centuries ago in a text that was never really about armies or spears or open fields. It was about the mind that commands them. And that mind, the one capable of this exact kind of quiet, deliberate strength, is available to you. Not someday, not after some further round of preparation, But the very next time someone tries to pull a reaction out of you before you've decided, on your own terms, whether to give one, the next time you feel outmaneuvered by a person, by a moment, by your own racing thoughts spinning the same replay for the fourth time, remember, this isn't a personal failing. It never was. It's a strategic position, and strategic positions, unlike character flaws, can always be improved with the right discipline applied consistently over time. You now have 7 laws you didn't have at the start of this video. Know yourself before anything else. Spend your composure like the finite resource it is. Read the terrain as it actually is, not as your fear narrates it. Recognize the enemy inside the gate for what it is, and let it speak without letting it decide. Practice stillness and stop performing your interior for people who haven't earned it. Hold when the real moment of contact finally arrives, because it will. And stay formless enough to meet whatever ground you're actually standing on, rather than the ground you planned for. If this way of thinking landed for you, this channel exists to keep building it with you, one strategic law at a time. Not as a lecture series on ancient warfare, and not as content to be consumed once and forgotten, but as a shared practice, a discipline we're building together, video by video, conversation by conversation, each one adding another tool to the same kit. Stay close if you want more of this. There's a lot more terrain to cover, and it gets more interesting the further in you go. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need the last word, the sharpest comeback, the visible, applause-worthy victory in front of a room that will forget about it by tomorrow. You need something quieter and far more durable, command of your own mind. In the exact moment it's tested most, when everything in you wants to hand that command away. That was always the real strategy Sun Tzu was teaching, 2,500 years before anyone needed it for a difficult meeting or a hard conversation with someone they love. Not how to defeat an opponent standing across from you, how to win without fighting at all.